on Enlightened World Network. So before we launch into our discussion of lesson 26 in the workbook, which has a lot in it, a lot of really beautiful stuff in it. It seems hard-hitting, but in fact, one of the foundational truths of our own awakening, of our own salvation, you name the term, of this process, the end of this journey that we are all on and have all been on. It's contained right here in lesson 26. So before we get into that, I just want to call your attention to 2 days ago. So it was this past Friday here on the live stream. Kim Venter joined me. If you have not checked out that live stream from 2 days ago, Kim sat down with me as my guest here on A Course in Miracles 365 and talked about her 2-year journey with the Course, what this has meant to her personally. And she shares in a fair amount of detail how this has impacted her and left her a completely different person than she was 2 years ago when she picked this book up for the first time. So if you're out there watching this, whether it's live or whether you're watching the replay, go back and take a look at that video from 2 days ago with Kim Venter here on EWN, because it's really proof positive that if one takes these lessons to heart, if you make a decision right now in the present moment to begin this journey, that you will have massive transformation in your life. And that'll be the case even if you only do one workbook lesson. Because just opening this up is opening the door. The Course says throughout the text and the workbook that the Holy Spirit needs just a slight little opening, just a little tiny shred of willingness, a small invitation to rush in, because this is what love does. It rushes in. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. It rushes in, and there you have it. So just even the slightest little invitation will work. If you've been sitting there with a copy of this book on your shelf for several weeks or several months, or even several years, maybe today is the day where you're going to pick that up and really begin a journey that, if you stick with it, make a decision moment to moment to do it, will, in fact, utterly remake and transform your life. Utterly. I've been doing this for 8 years after practicing all kinds of spiritual traditions. I was raised in a couple of different Christian traditions, one of them very fundamentalist, and left those in the past. And I've studied Buddhism, I've studied shamanism, all kinds of different spiritual traditions in this world. And what I like to say is A Course in Miracles found me 8 years ago in 2013. I mean, yeah, I found it, bought a copy at a bookstore and took it home and began to go through it, starting with the workbook, by the way. That's how I chose to do it. Yeah, it's been a tremendous journey, and I'm absolutely not the same person that I was 8 years ago. I have changed in so many ways. And if you've been working with this material for longer than that, and I know some of you have been, then you can most certainly attest to that. Most certainly. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for all the shares, the comments, the likes, the loves, whether you're catching this live or on the replay here. I appreciate your taking the time out to be with me and all of us here at Enlightened World Network today. All right, so lesson 26, shall we? That's fun laughter. My attack thoughts are attacking my invulnerability. That's the idea for today. My attack thoughts are attacking my invulnerability. Now, on the surface, that really makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If we think about attacking someone, That implies, right, necessarily that we can be attacked ourselves. If we can be attacked ourselves, are we invulnerable? And then in our minds, no. And in the world, no. If we can lash out at somebody, let's just say verbally, we can be lashed out at in return. And we often are. We all too often are. That if you can attack, whether it's verbal, physical, emotional, you name it, you can also be attacked. That's the way our minds operate here in the world. And it's very, very interesting here in this workbook lesson that one of the foundational quotes here in this lesson that I want to call your attention to is right here in paragraph 1, where it reads, and this is the 4th sentence here, if you're following along with the numbers here on the workbook. What would have effects through you must also have effects on you. Let's work with this one for a minute here. What would have effects through you must also have effects on you. What would have effects through you if you took a look at your neighbor and gave him or her a piece of your mind, saying all kinds of things that you haven't dared to say that are not compliments, for example. Like what would have effects through you must also have effects on you. How do they have effects on you? Well, number one, your neighbor could give you the same dose or worse of whatever you say to them, for example. That could happen. Now, what are you gonna feel like? Well, you might feel vindicated for a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, but inevitably, I mean, how does it feel when you just dump on somebody? We've all done this at one time or another. We've all let our baggage loose on somebody. How do we feel after that? Not in the immediate aftermath where we may feel vindicated or like they got what they deserve or I got that off my chest. Good for me. But after that wears off, then how does that make you feel? Does it make you feel good? Not likely, right? Not likely. What had effects through you now has effects on you. This makes perfect sense when we think about it. So the course goes on to tell us here that we don't understand this yet. What does Jesus mean by we don't understand this yet? Well, our salvation lies in this very fundamental operating principle of our own minds. What would have effects through us also has effects on us. Why is this the case? Because if we're capable of lashing out, we're also capable of loving, or loving out if you prefer, rather than lashing out. I like that. Has a better ring to it, doesn't it? Loving out, yes. We can extend love. What has effects through us has effects on us. How does it feel to you when you give somebody a compliment, for example, or you smile at them and wish them good day? Basic examples, basic acts of kindness. Yeah, lifting somebody up that may be having a good day by just being there, being present with them. Acts of love that have effects through you, have effects on you. That's where our salvation lies, because we have a choice. We have a choice right now in the present moment of love or fear. And what has effects through us has effects on us. This is very profound. And the workbook goes on to say in so many different words that we're not expected to just grasp this right away. That is part of the genius, in my mind, of the workbook, is that it starts with what look like really basic ideas, and we're only asked to practice them. Again, I've said this many times, and it bears repeating because sometimes our minds just aren't, we've so conditioned ourselves that we're just not capable of jumping headlong into something like A Course in Miracles, or we're not capable of having, boom, an instant enlightenment experience, so to speak, because we've just been so conditioned that something like this is very, very ingenious. The workbook just kind of gives us glimpses of light. And if you prefer to think of it as peeling layers away from ourselves of the ego, yeah, it's that chipping away at it. So we literally chip away at ourselves in a good way, in a good way. And we see that we can be very destructive to ourselves. We can also be very, very loving. And that's the choice that each of us gets to make in the present moment. So let's jump ahead a little bit, a couple of paragraphs here in the commentary on lesson 26. So paragraph 4 tells us that practice with today's idea is going to help us to understand that vulnerability or invulnerability is the result of our own thoughts. In other words, our experience is the result of our own thoughts. Attack thoughts, loving thoughts. Which are we predominantly choosing? That'll be the experience that's reflected back out to us. That's how this all works. And let's talk for a minute here about psychological projection, because our attack thoughts, let's go back to the example of our neighbor that we want to give a piece of our mind to. And let's say we indulge that ego desire to attack. Now, we're projecting outward. So projection in terms of psychology and A Course in Miracles and just in general is we don't like to feel icky. We don't like to feel guilt. It's not pleasant. It's not fun to feel guilty or ashamed or sad or angry, enraged. So what do? We project that outward. We try to get rid of all of these feelings. Why? Well, because they don't feel good. Why don't they feel good? They're not who we really are. They're not who we really are. So we're trying unskillfully in this world all too often, but we're trying to distance ourselves from that. So rather than hold it and bring awareness and light to it and release it ourselves, we try to pawn it off. We try to pass the buck. We try to blame. We try to blame or lash out at somebody else for our own feelings of discomfort, of guilt, of fear. You name the emotion. That's what projection is. And in the world, that's how we run amok. That's how we get every troubling situation, every troubling problem that we face individually, that we face collectively on the whole planet. Yeah, it's projection. So that's what's going on in our minds, that what would have effects through us also has effects on us. Right? I mean, if we blame somebody for our own lot, doesn't improve our lot at all. I mean, short of maybe feeling vindicated or getting an adrenaline rush for 15 seconds after you tell somebody off, for example, that's really about it. I mean, it doesn't actually improve our situation in any way. Deep down, it does not. So the practice periods for today are really, really important. And I invite you, as with every day here in the workbook, to pay close attention to the way the workbook suggests that you apply the day's idea. And if it calls for a certain number of practice periods, today it's 6, and you only do 2, so what? Really, so what? That's fine. That's better than nothing. Just continue to apply this idea whenever you remember it, basically, whenever you remember it. And it has us think about things that we're concerned about and go there in our mind with all of the possible outcomes that we're thinking about. So let's say, for example, that you're paying rent somewhere, whether it's a house or a business. Let's just use this as an example, that You're concerned about making your rent payment this month. We'll use that as an example. And then this asks you to state it in your mind. I'm concerned about making my rent payment this month. I'm afraid that such and such will happen. I'm afraid that I'll fall behind on my rent. I'm afraid I'll be fined. I'm afraid that I'll be evicted. And keep going with this stream, because this is what our minds do. We're just being very honest with ourselves. I'm afraid I'll be evicted. I'm afraid I'll have to sell all my belongings to find a new place to live. I'm afraid that I won't be able to come up with first and last to find a new place to live. I'm afraid I'm going to have to move in with my family. I'm afraid that I'm going to feel horrible about myself. I'm afraid that I won't be able to make that kind of money again. I'm afraid of losing this place. I'm afraid of change. I'm afraid that XYZ will happen. After every thought that you come up that you're afraid will happen, just tell yourself today, that thought is an attack upon myself. Right? I'm afraid I'm going to get evicted. That thought is an attack upon myself. Is it not? It is. And all, again, that the workbook has you do is just apply this idea as frequently and as honestly as you're able. So this is a big, thick, heavy-hitting workbook exercise. And this is the third time that I've gone through it. First time that I've gone through it on a live stream with all of you worldwide. So I thank you again for tuning in. And let's see who's joining us today and if there are any comments or questions while we still have some time here. All right, Deidre and Robert, hello. Shelley, hi, nice to see you on here. Thank you all for joining me. Yeah, Deidre, it's push and pull in a different way, yes. And Shelley writes, we project uncomfortable feelings onto others. Yeah, we do that. We do that. And it doesn't take an awful lot of examination. As people say, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, and it doesn't take any kind of intellectual brilliance, does it, to realize that we all do this all the time. And we do it without even thinking about it. And this is where people place blame on someone else. If you feel uncomfortable, well, nobody likes to feel uncomfortable, do they? So we try to get this off of our chest, so to speak. I got to get that off my chest, as the common saying goes. Well, what would have effects through you will also have effects on you. And that's so worth repeating. I just, I know I've said that maybe 20 times. I don't know. I'll have to go back and watch and count, but I want to emphasize that our salvation really does lie in that, because if we extend love instead of project fear, then we'll get love in return. Boom, our entire world changes. So Andrea, thank you for joining in. And yes, Deidre writes, Cindy, you're going to love this. Yeah, my wife, Cindy, celebrated her birthday on the 2nd of February, and she has publicly, on a global stage, mind you, right here, declared that this is her birth month. Well, today's February 28th, and it is the last day of your birth month. So Deidre, thank you for wishing Cindy a last day, a happy birth month. Yes. And I believe she's watching live. All right. So if you have any other questions or comments that you don't get to on the live stream, again, as always, during the course of the day, I will go back and I will look through the comments, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. Now, I aim to be here as a resource for you, not just to show up and deliver a few minutes worth of talk on a live stream, but also as a resource ongoing. So if you have particular questions or comments about A Course in Miracles or the study of A Course in Miracles, if you're going through the workbook, etc., and you have questions, feel free to type these right here into this comment thread, and I will happily answer those for you. Yes, and then Cindy writes, yeah, well, she's going to miss her month. See, I knew she was watching. Right, thanks for joining me. Yeah, from the next room. Okay. So Shelley, the one last comment, I'll read this one before we wrap up here. Thank you for commenting. This discussion has caused me to be more aware of how I'm projecting onto my stepsons. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Important to take ownership of our feelings. Okay. Yes. Thank you for commenting. Yeah, I'm glad you joined us today. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's important to take ownership of our feelings. Spirituality is about owning it, isn't it? And it really is. When we realize what we're doing, it's our responsibility. I mean, it's no one's responsibility other than our own to say, oh, yeah, I've been doing this. Let me take this moment right now to do something differently. Let me extend love instead. Let me forgive instead of lash out and blame. And what we do to ourselves is blame, then turn that on ourselves, don't we? Often is we blame ourselves for having done all of this in the past. Well, I mean, the past really is the past, it's gone. And what we have is right now an opportunity to choose yet again, to choose differently, to make a different choice for love instead of fear. And as much as we're able to bring our awareness to that, we'll be able to change, massively change outcomes. And does it take time? Yeah, it does. It takes time. That's what time is for. Time is for our awakening. That is its purpose. So thank you very much for making that comment. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone's joining in here today. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend here. It's Sunday in North America. All right. So if it's Monday already where you are, I hope you're having a great Monday. And thank you all for tuning in. I will be back tomorrow and every day here on Enlightened World Network. This has been A Course in Miracles 365, Awakening to Love. And thank you so much for joining.